the brain, to state the extremely obvious, is an organ. Just as the heart is an organ, the liver, the lungs, the kidneys. And the way it works is it's receiving input from the outside world and it has to decide what to make of it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Drake, and this is Who's Missing. Are you missing a neuroscientist and a foodie in your community? As you look around the table, do you have a doctor in the house? How about someone you could talk to for hours about anything? Because that is who Sruthi Swaminathan is for me. After listening to my interview with her effervescent and accomplished self, you are going to want to invite her to your table or at least show up at one of her pop-up dinners. Yes, pop-up dinners. She is not just a user experience researcher at Ipsos. She's an instructor at Kendall College. She's an independent business consultant, and she's a pop-up dining chef and host. So, what you're about to hear is a window into how the brain works from someone who's looking at the brain from many different angles, and why mental health is health. How to weave your passions, your pursuits into a life where you are living every day, not just surviving or getting through. I think you will really enjoy it and develop a new relationship or evolved relationship with this organ of ours, this brain that we prize so much. Enjoy.
Sruthi, it's so good to see you. Tell me about your relationship with speed and urgency and getting things done, and how do you relate to it? Because I know balance is something we're always talking about.
I find myself often just go. Because I'm the kind of person that I like to get stuff done. I'm not saying other people don't like to get things done. For me, when there is stuff to be done, I can't sit still. And what that results in sometimes is me just overdoing it and then having to be I can't do anything for 2 days. So I keep now a written planner where I jot down every day in 2 different colors, stuff that's work related and stuff that's non-work related. And I have top 3 priorities, and I follow that pretty religiously now, because it helps me just say, if I get these 3 things done and nothing else, all of this other stuff can be pushed off. And it helps me just not feel bad at the end of the day for not completing a list, which I think used to happen before.
So you're telling me, even if you're a neuroscientist, you still struggle with time and energy philosophies?
Yes, absolutely. It can happen to anyone.
Right. You don't rise above the level of being human. I just started this 3 priorities thing. What are the things?
I find that a lot of times when I don't get things done, it's because I look at that and there's already overwhelm associated with it. Whereas if I just give myself that grace at the beginning and just say, cook something, may not seem like much to someone looking at it, but I look at that and I say, okay, I can cook something, so I try to set the bar. People are always set the bar high, set the bar high. Yeah, that makes sense in some cases, but I want to say it sometimes makes sense to set the bar low so that you're not relying on motivation, which is something I actually picked up from a book I was reading called Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he really talks about, if you're looking for habits to stick, if you're looking for consistency, the way to do it is to set your goals so low for each day that motivation does not impact them.
Yeah. So just to keep with James Clear for a second, as you look at those priorities, we're obsessed with Atomic Habits. How do those sort of fashion, and I know this for a lot of people sounds like a big question, but how do they fashion their way into who you're trying to become, your identity, those priorities that you've listed today?
I take commitments seriously. So for example, you and I are talking right now, we've planned this, we have it in our calendars. Like, I take that seriously. I view it as each of us is willing to set time aside from our day to do this and incorporate this into our day. And that adds value for me. And then with the cooking thing, that's almost like my reward for getting to 6 p.m. today.
Yes.
I think we talked when we were in person about doing something that kind of makes you really happy each day. And for me, those things are often spending time with the kids. And by kids, I mean my human son, Zane, and my puppy, Yara. It's reading and it's cooking. And more recently, it's exercise. So I just tried to kind of build that in and try to make that a priority, because it's easy to just have 3 priorities that you're just kind of pushing to get through. And I feel like I like giving myself a little reward at the end of the day.
Well, and if you don't create the space for that, like, to your point, it sounds like you have enough self-awareness that you're just going to keep going and doing and going and doing. And that's like your operating system. So the pause of, I'm rewarding myself, I'm enjoying today, you know, it sort of throws this idea of like fulfillment's in the future, you know, like out the window.
It's something I would say I learned. It was one of the first things that my therapist told me when I went to her back in 2016. I was having a rough time. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't motivated to do anything. One of the first things she said to me is she was like, and I believe this, some people may disagree with this, but she told me that happiness is a choice, right? So she said, like, you may not be able to control kind of external circumstances. Of course you can, but then can you try to find something in each day that makes you happy? Like, can you choose to make that a priority? And she also told me kind of, you can't say, I'll be happy when, because that when is an external circumstance. I'll be happy when I get a promotion, when COVID is over, when I'm done with this project. Like, it's going to be a moving target almost. And especially for people who I think are like, go, 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 go. I need to do this. I need to achieve this. You can't base kind of your peace of mind or your happiness on a future target. Because that's going to keep moving is what I've found, at least.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, values and priorities and identity. And like, there's that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything, you know, the Stoic sort of philosophy, which is like, sometimes I'm like, it's a lot of pressure, you know, because I think implicit in it is like perfection, right? Like, do everything well. I would love to hear something that you maybe feel like you haven't done well, but was useful anyway as like a learning experience. Because I'm sure you've been intentional, but I also imagine that there's been times where you've sort of stumbled into things, or maybe things, right? Yeah. So tell me about the stumbling. Tell me about the mistakes.
This makes me laugh when I think about it. One of the things I stumbled into was neuroscience. I stumbled into that. Like, I was a biology undergrad. I worked in a lab at Northwestern afterwards. It was a neuroscience lab. It was a neurodevelopment lab. I feel like now that I think about it, I feel like I wanted to study the brain because I'm really just curious about behavior. Behavior is what's interesting to me, you know, and how brain development affects behavior and what happens when the brain's working as it should, what happens when things fall apart, was kind of my rationale for why I wanted to go into brain development. So that's one thing. To answer the other part of your question, you know, something that I maybe wasn't good at, or things that were hard that I did anyway and I found helpful, was write code. And I had never, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, I had never seen a line of code before. And it was hard. Like, it is like, I mean, it is learning a new language. I had to learn a different way of thinking. I always had kind of a complex about it. Like, oh, I'm not good at it. My code's way longer than other people's. It's not running as fast. I have all these bugs in it. And I could have taken 2 approaches there. One could have been to become an expert at programming, you know, like learn the ins and outs at it, commit all of my time to it. Or I could take it and say, how is this going to serve me in my goal during this PhD? And you could see it as a means to an end. And I did the latter, mainly because I wasn't interested enough in it to completely throw myself headlong. I feel like I put enough effort into it to get what I needed out of it. And I have no regrets about that because, you can't focus on everything. You can't become like an expert at everything, and it's fine. Like, you don't have to be.
I think totally agree. And here's where the rubber meets the road, right? Like, everything can be a priority. There is a lot, like when you really decide on what's important to you and your values, and who you want to become. Look, this is not the easier, softer way of living. It's a tough road to go because it means you're making intentional choices. People might not like it. It's courageous. I think living into values, Brené Brown talks a lot about this in Dare to Lead. It doesn't mean like life is easier. It just means, you have a framework that allows you to like live in integrity. As we talk about that, is there an example of a time where you chose, right, with some consequence to live into your values?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier about early on, when I decided to go to a therapist, like that was not an easy thing for me to just do because again, I'm used to being in control of me. Like I'm used to going back to like the brain a little bit here. The brain, to state the extremely obvious, is an organ. Just as the heart is an organ, the liver, the lungs, the kidneys. And the way it works is it's receiving input from the outside world and it has to decide what to make of it, right? So during my PhD, I studied how the brain kind of learns from experience and adapts to kind of changes in the environment. It's not a static organ, like it's constantly evolving. It's taking all these inputs and figuring out much faster than we can fathom what those inputs mean, how we should respond to them. So it's directly impacting our behavior. So once a decision is kind of made about something, other parts of our body are directed to execute this action. So thinking about, saying, okay, the brain is an organ, I feel like we treat the brain differently than we treat the other organs in our body. And what I mean by that is when something is wrong with the other organs, like if something's wrong with your heart, you're going to go to a cardiologist with probably like minimal friction, right? And you're going to listen to them. You're going to take the medication that you need and you're going to do what you need to. But that's less the case with the brain. I know mental health people are talking about it a lot more now, but I feel like part of the reason for that might be when something is wrong with the brain, in a lot of cases, the way that manifests is through a behavior. And as people who like to be in control of ourselves, I think we view behaviors as something that we should be able to change just through sheer willpower. And that's not always the case. Like brains need help too. You heard it here first. Brains need help too, and sometimes in the form of behavioral therapy, just like talking to somebody, and sometimes in the form of some sort of pharmaceutical interventions with taking medication, and that is fine. So I think for me being like, like I should just be able to change this behavior. Like, what do you mean I'm sad when there's no milk in the fridge when I want to eat cereal? Just go buy some. It doesn't work like that. Like there are physical reasons why certain things happen in the brain, and why you act a certain way. But like I was hesitant to accept that and I studied this stuff. But then ultimately for me, it was like, I don't want to feel like this all the time. Like, I don't want to be stressed all the time. I don't want to be bummed all the time. I want to be able to go out and do stuff. So that's something where I knew I wanted to be that person that wanted to keep having some zest for life, I guess. Like it kind of bummed me out that I was bummed out, if that makes sense. And so that's an example of where I kind of took an action that felt very like almost unnecessary at times, but then I knew that I had to do it because trying to just like white knuckle it wasn't working.
I just recently went through, a really dark time where I needed to step up my level of care. And it was just sort of a quandary, but also a really powerful experience to be helped in the way that I help, right? And I know you relate to that. And to surrender to needing support and needing help. And that is, you talk about, we want to control ourselves. We want to be able to, through sheer will and white knuckling. I also have a great deal of familiarity with the 12-step community. And, we talk about, right? Like, we're just going to get through the day, like just holding on, right? Yeah. And if you're holding on, you're surviving, you're not living, you're not thriving, you're not.
Exactly.
So, I think it sounds like your therapeutic experience allowed you to kind of like let go of a little bit of control for yourself and you mentioned grace earlier, like let yourself off the hook a bit and get some help. Yeah. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I went in there just with my hands up. I was like, I'm feeling like this, been feeling like this for months and months. Don't want to feel like this. I will do whatever.
As you made the decision to get additional support, was there anything, inside of you, like, I sort of think of like how we were raised when it comes to therapy and like whether or not it's talked about or encouraged, or if it's like, ooh, we don't talk about how Sruthi goes to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience just as a woman moving in the world to step in? It's so much more accepted now than it ever was.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you have any hesitations or preconceived notions?
I didn't, just because I've had friends who have gone through this stuff. And I remember very naively, like in college when, a friend was going through this, I remember just saying to them like, wait, you're depressed? Like, why don't we go for a walk? Like, why don't we go get dinner? And I just didn't know that is not what it takes, or that's not all it takes, I should say. There's more to it. And I think what also helped me is like, my mom's a physician. And I hadn't really talked to her about any of this for a lot of the time that I was going through it. And then when I finally told her, she immediately switched from like mom mode to doctor mode. And she immediately said, okay, I hear you. You need to see a prescribing provider in conjunction with a therapist. You need to go to them and do what they say. And in 6 weeks, you will feel differently. I think when I first started taking medication and stuff, and there's a lot of questions around like, oh, how long should I be on this? Or could this be a dependency risk and this and that? But my mom from the beginning was very much like, look, the focus right now on day one, when you're starting to take the medication, is not when are you going to stop taking the medication? It's how are you going to feel better? So the question of stopping the medication is like not the question to ask. But she would also stress, all of it just depends. All these services and these avenues are available, but the results are really dependent on the person deciding to do it and deciding to stick with it. And I don't mean to say like I'm some sort of hero for having like stuck through it. People have all sorts of situations, like life situations, that prevent them from being able to do that. But I will say I went in just scared that I was never going to stop feeling that way. And I think that fright drove me to do it. And it's kind of a running, I feel like I just try to constantly do stuff I'm afraid of. That obviously wasn't something that I anticipated was going to come up that I had to do. But I just try to do things I'm afraid of because I feel like it's worked out mostly fine. And sometimes in different contexts with some like excitement along the way too, which I always welcome. So
yes. Well, and I think that, I live with this quandary of, can we change absent crisis, right? Like, can we really change and really be brave and courageous if the stakes aren't high? Because comfort is so seductive, right? And I wonder what you make of being able to, as yourself, sort of say, this isn't okay with me. I need to go get help. I think like that's a really important decisional point, because you have to love yourself enough to say this is unacceptable to me. What are you thinking about a lot right now? And what are you really good at? And what are you trying to get better at in your career?
Yeah. So for years, and I defended my PhD in 2012. So I'm coming up on like the 10-year anniversary of me like submitting my thesis, which is crazy to me. But for years after that, I basically told like not that many people that I had a PhD. And I would never lead with that. And I think the reason was anytime it was brought up or if someone said, oh, this is Sruthi, she has a PhD in neuroscience, the response to that would just be this awe, like their eyes would get really big. And even after earning that PhD, after going through that program, after taking the coursework and doing the research, I still sometimes felt like an imposter. I would still be like, oh, no, like anyone can do that. Oh, no, it's not a big deal. Yeah, I did a PhD, but really what I love to do is cook, which I do love to cook. But like that's not what I spent 5 years training. Yeah. You know, and it's not to say that what you train in is what you have to stay in. That it's not that at all. But I feel like for years I just kind of discounted my own efforts in earning that. And it took years for me to kind of be like, why am I doing that? So learning to just kind of like own that. And if people are awed by it, great. If people are like, oh, cool, great. If people don't care, that's fine too.
And I really appreciate just the ownership, because I think we get to decide. This gets me really excited. I just noticed my whole body changed because you get me excited. But we get to tell the story. We get to name what our identity is. We have to own it, right? And absent not owning it, and mine has changed. I don't know about yours, but like how I talk about myself has kind of changed over the years, right? Because I have changed. Thank God. As you kind of get into your 37th year.
Yes.
You know, what are you hitting on and highlighting in your identities that you feel the most excited about?
Yeah. Food is still my number one.
I thought so.
I absolutely love food.
Yeah.
While I was doing my PhD, I started a food blog. I decided to quit my job, and it was crazy to quit a job that has like great benefits and like steady salary and all this stuff. But it was just something I had to do.
I get it.
And I spent the next year and a half just kind of dabbling in all sorts of food projects. So I consulted for a couple of food startups in Chicago. I contributed recipes and wrote for an online magazine. I entered a cooking competition in Chicago and I was one of 3 finalists. I also went and cooked on TV on WGN. That was really fun. And I started hosting pop-up dinners in my home. So I would post the menu online and people would buy tickets and strangers would show up to my house and we'd share a meal together. And it was fantastic. Obviously, because of COVID, I didn't do that, but now I teach virtual cooking classes online. And I give all of these examples because you were asking about, you know, what am I like leaning into or what's kind of that identity? My identity is I like doing stuff that scares me. I, you know, moved around a lot when I was a kid. You know, I've lived in like 5 different countries. I always kind of just had to like adapt. You know, of course I'd be sad about leaving friends behind, but I would just adapt because I had to when I was moving around. And I think that kind of informed how I am today, where I get kind of antsy if I'm like, I never want to feel stuck. So I like to be able to have my hands in multiple projects or multiple things that I'm doing and kind of feed my soul from like all of those things. And I really enjoy that. But I will say the common denominator for all of those food things I just told you about is I was scared to do every single one of them. You know, like, why would they want me on TV? Like, what am I going to contribute to the viewers? Why would people want to come home and eat my food? I'm not a trained chef. I didn't go to culinary school. Why should I teach? Like, and it was all these whys, all of them centered around doubting myself. But it turns out I'm the only one who was asking those questions. I love that feeling of like going into it with fear and then coming out the other side, just like with that sense of like exhilaration, not that you aced it or won or any of that, but just that, man, I tried that. How cool was that? Something else could come from this. And I want to do that again. Right. So that's the thing. Like, I think you mentioned earlier about comfort and how we like to kind of sit in that. And it's so easy to be in that. And I enjoy comfort. Like, I love air conditioning. Like you know, I always say like air conditioning is probably like the number one invention ever. And like a distant second is an epidural. So like, I enjoy comforts. Don't get me wrong. But I also like once in a while, just like doing something a little bit unexpected that be like, wouldn't it be cool to try that? And then just try it. Like, why not?
Where the only failure, it sounds like, for you and your value system and how you make decisions and your identities would be to not try.
Yeah, because I'm at that stage in my life where it's like, what is the worst that could happen that if I enter this competition? I'm not a finalist. Like, so what? You know, what is the worst that could happen if I email this TV station and say, hey, because that's not something where they called me. You know, I contacted them and said, I was on your station for this competition. I was a finalist. I would like to come on and cook on TV.
Yeah.
And it's up to them to say yes or no.
Two thoughts on just, the sentiments you shared. One is, I love asking the question, what is the courageous thing to do? Because I think it invites in like, I could do the thing I usually do, but what would be like just a stretch, right? The other thing I want to come back to, when you talked about going into therapy and like, this is unacceptable to me and I want to live, is like one thing I ask myself, and sometimes I'm startled at the end of a day, and I wonder what you make of this. Did I live today? Like really live, and I think when I've been in depression and anxiety and, sought help and got treatment, and all of this is pretty recent stuff for me. I've had a couple difficult bouts with it in my life. That's the piece that I missed so much was, did I live today or did I live up here, in my brain? Any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's really fascinating because I feel like that's a very active process. And I also think the cool thing about doing that repeatedly is, let's say you do it 100 times and like 70 of those times it's fun. Each of those 70 times is encouraging you to do it one more time. That's how I think of it. Like not all 100 are going to be super fun. Some of them you may do, and you may just be like, I'm not going to do that again. And that is fine. Yeah. But if you do it and you have a positive experience, it's basically priming you to be like, I should take another risk like this. Or the next time you wonder whether you should do something, you think about that feeling you had last time when you finished up, and that's that in itself is a motivator that can kind of propel you into the next thing that you can start to do.
Let me ask you about this piece, this very piece. I want to stay with it. When I was in treatment for anxiety and depression, one of the things that we talked about was how hard it is for our brains to accumulate positive emotions. If you have a thought on that, because I have really practiced, like when I'm feeling aligned, joyful, happy, like marking it, really staying with it. Because, more than I do, right? Our brains have a repository for negative. It's like, we don't want you to die. So we're going to like clock this stuff and you're going to get, and that's like, I get obsessed with that, right? Like staying safe, accumulating positive emotions. Like, when I say all of that, what do you make of it? Do you have experience with it? What's your thought on it?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say I've realized is like nothing's permanent. Including like any kind of, and I try to remind myself of this, especially when things are not going well, right? Yes. Or especially when I'm like just bummed about something, or, that helps me kind of be like, I'm feeling like this now, but I won't feel like this later. When I'm happy, I just try to like stay in that, but then also recognizing that I shouldn't expect to feel this level of like elation an hour from now, or 2 days from now, or a week from now, because that is just not what like the human experience it like it's just unrealistic. So when people are like, oh, be happy all the time, smile all the time, like I don't want to. Like there's stuff going on. Like and I don't mean that to say, I like want to think negatively, but I think it's just accepting that we're not always going to feel one emotion, or we're not, there's times when you're like, I wish I was sad about this, but I'm not.
There's the judgment, right?
Yeah. And one of the things my therapist says to me is, she says, I'm a should'er.
You should all over yourself?
Yeah. I haven't heard that before. That's so funny. Because I'll be like, should I do that? Should I have done that? Should I have said that? And she's like, instead of should, why don't you just ask, do you want to? And you're like, do you want to do that? Do you want to feel that? Do you want to go here? And so with this idea of like the brain keeping a repository of stuff, I mean, really what I studied during my PhD, like I said before, is like how the brain kind of accumulates information and then decides what to do with it, right? So let me give you an example of this kind of holding and releasing like pattern, right? And so the longer you've been kind of exposed to something or practiced something or experienced something, the more automatic those things become, so that your brain can kind of do the heavy lifting, I call it, elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So for example, when you first learn a language and you're trying to speak in it all the time, you may have to kind of pause and like collect your thoughts and like cycle through some sort of Rolodex, like a vocabulary, from that language to decide what fits in what situation. Mm-hmm. And your brain is really trying to recall what you've already learned and trying to match it to what you need to say in that moment. When you're fluent in a language, you may be able to just carry on a conversation in that about something else while also trying to remember directions to a place or how to calculate tip. And that's by design. Like, it wouldn't make sense for the brain to just every time you need to do something, like put in all this energy into that. Taking this to this idea of like emotion and habits and behaviors and stuff, the more you practice something, the more automatic it becomes, right? So if you're practicing every day, like you were saying earlier about what am I doing today that's courageous, that's just going to become part of what you do every day. It's not going to be something you have to write on your list.
Right.
It becomes automatic. And when that becomes automatic, it becomes part of your repertoire. You can then spend those resources doing something else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
totally. And
okay.
Yes, it was brilliant. You're brilliant. It was brilliant. This conversation has been brilliant. I think it's not sexy, right? I mean, practicing day in and day out. This is not what the United States and capitalism is designed to do. It's like, take this pill, ready, you're fixed. And I don't mean psychotropic medication, and I don't necessarily mean, like, because medication is helpful, but it's like, it's the daily care and feeding daily. And that's not sexy.
And even about emotions, practicing this kind of stuff helps me. Like when I'm like feeling a certain way, it's like, well, this isn't forever.
Yeah.
I maybe had this bad meeting, but guess what? I'm going to go to a workout class and I know I'm going to feel great after that. Right. Yep. And then I'll reassess, and this idea of like building up positive emotions, like that can work the other way too, because you're really I just think with the brain, it's just like computing stuff, right? It's just collecting things, deciding what to do with it, and then initiating an action. Like, it's not this, like, you can't just think one thing and immediately have it happen. It does take that consistency. And like you described it, that boring every day. We fall to the level of our systems, right? That's like the message in Atomic Habits. And I'm really hearing that from you today. Absolutely.
As we round the bend, first of all, I could talk to you for 7 more hours, at least.
Same.
I want to sort of honor what you said, which is like food is at the core. And I want to make sure that we give you a chance to promote your pop-up dinners. So where people can find out more, buy tickets, follow what you're up to. Give us the instructions, Sruthi.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be opening up my pop-up dinners again this fall. It's on a website called Eat With, like EATWITH. It's sort of like an Airbnb for dining experiences. So you can search for me by name there, just my first name and last name, and it'll show all of kind of the meals that I have coming up, all of the sessions I have coming up. If it's my street food series, it will say that. If it's something else, it will say that. And you can go on there and purchase tickets. And I believe the day before, you will be instructed as to where you go or where you come, I guess, to my home. And you'll just show up and we'll have a great meal together. And I'll also say it's such a fun experience because it's a self-selected group. People who think that this kind of thing is weird are not going to come. And people who think this kind of thing is weird are not going to host. Is there anywhere you would like us to follow you and track what you're up to? Newsletters, IG handle? So you can follow me on @kitcheningaround. You are... I can't believe I get to know you in so many different formats. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Emily. This is so much fun. It was so much fun.
I always love when we have a guest on that offers an opportunity for us to engage with them in real life, because truly the whole point of Who's Missing is to evaluate, who do I need to invite? And maybe you need to invite Sruthi to your table, but certainly you need to go to one of her pop-up dinners if you're here in Chicago. And in the meantime, just to satiate your appetite a little further, here's 3 takeaways that I got from our conversation in the midst of dozens of them. She said it's okay if you don't go all out on everything, and I'm going to give you that permission too. You don't need to be the best at everything. In fact, what you need to do is understand what you value and live into those values in small ways every day. It's not about the big explosion. It's about daily care and feeding. Another thing I heard, look, the more you practice something, the more automatic it becomes. And that's why we love habits and James Clear's atomic habits. And if you don't like how things are going, you are the one who's in charge of your life, right? So how you change your daily system is how you get to the goal you want. And then lastly, when something's wrong with the brain, and it happens, it manifests as behaviors. So look at your behaviors. If there's something you want to change, that's where you need to go. And we can't really know ourselves by ourselves. It's just impossible. So we need the support, we need help. And I really heard that from Sruthi today. So, oh man, I'm going to have to think about this one for a while, pun intended, and would love to hear what you think of it too. After talking about food with Sruthi, it only feels right to talk about an after dinner drink or a first thing in the morning drink. I mean, if we're being honest, it's probably a throughout the day drink. Chicago French Press is a coffee destination aimed at, and I love this, connecting Java drinkers to quality, healthier coffee options and vital, what chance do you have to do this too? Vital philanthropic endeavors. It's roasted here in Chicago, but it delivers everywhere nationwide, and I have sent it, I haven't sent it globally, but I've sent it nationwide. It's fair trade, it's non-GMO, and they're grinding for a cause in which 5% of the proceeds from every bag you buy support nonprofit organizations. I'm a proud supporter of the brand, and the owner, Chris Christian, is a powerful CEO and an envelope pusher here in the community and beyond. So check them out at chicagofrenchpress.com and Chicago French Press on social.